So as we get ready for our next speaker, who is Monica Burns, and she's going to be speaking on Un-Indoctrinated, the movement to teach America's true history.
Hello again. As atheists, agnostics, and freethinkers, we all know the power of indoctrination and how it can make us extremely confident. I was hoping it would come off, but it won't. How it can make us extremely confident in our beliefs. But we typically don't see ourselves as actually being indoctrinated. We tend to see that indoctrination in other people. And we typically instill, whatever our indoctrinated beliefs and ideas are into children. We give them whatever attitudes we want them to have, and then they take on the thought process of the entire group or of the community. Now, this is normal. This is how we have our cultures. But often we're so entrenched in the society that we don't recognize that we haven't actually critically examined our beliefs. We don't examine why we believe as we do, yet those beliefs dictate how we think, how we act, and how we relate to other people. I remember when I first realized I was an atheist about a decade ago, I received in the mail from this random guy. I thought he was a random guy. I actually went to high school with his wife, and they had one of those shared Facebook pages. And he had seen something I posted, and he decided he was going to teach me that evolution was not true, and that creationism was. And he found my address, creeped me out first, found my address and mailed me this information from his website that he had gone through. He was a real big Ray Comfort. He really was a Ray Comfort fan. But I had to ask him, before we could get into evolution, I didn't really want to get into evolution and all that with him, but I said, before we can get into that, tell me why you even believe that the creation story is true. What about it makes you think it's true? And he said that he had lived his life as an atheist, and he one day sat in his truck and he realized he was living life heathenistically. I don't know what the word is, but he felt like he was drinking and having sex and being normal, and he needed and so he asked God to come in and stop it, stop him from having a good time. And he did, he really did. He said he wanted God to help lead him and teach him to be more not fun. But I had to ask him though, so why did you call on the Lord? You certainly weren't an atheist. No atheist does that. So why did you call on the Lord? And what Lord, And he said, I knew this and I knew that. But now he's from my hometown, as I said, so I know how religious my hometown was. I know how religious the state of Georgia is, that. And I had to ask him, so what are your parents? Are your parents Christians? And of course they were. They've been Christians his entire life. He couldn't really see how he had been, indoctrinated into that belief, and that he hadn't really come to Christianity in the manner that he thought he had. He couldn't see, or he better yet refused to acknowledge his indoctrination into those beliefs. So when you think of indoctrination, if you're like me, you typically think of Christianity or Islam or Westboro Baptist or something, or North Korea even. We tend to think of beliefs, and usually the religious beliefs of others, and we don't typically think of the ideologies that we are all indoctrinated into and what impact they have on us and on the rest of the world. An ideology is the beliefs and opinions of a group of people, of course, you all know that. This is Charles Mills. He is a Jamaican-American philosopher, and he authored a small book titled The Racial Contract. In it, he argues that white supremacy was once a transparent social construct, but that now it's purposely made invisible, and that invisibility is pernicious. In it, he asserts that the world is one structure, white supremacy, and the American history and political philosophy that we have largely ignored that fact in order to maintain it. White supremacy, I'm going to start at the top. I'm not going to read that whole thing because you all can either read it or find it online. It's kind of long. Oh, shit. My bad. White supremacy is the unnamed political system that has made the modern world what it is today. You will not find this term in any introductory or even advanced texts in political theory. This omission is not accidental. It reflects the fact that standard textbooks and courses have for the most part been written and designed by whites who take their racial privilege so much for granted they do not even see it as political or as a form of domination. It is just taken for granted. It is the background against which other systems, which we do study as political systems, are highlighted. Whiteness is not really a color at all, but a set of power relations. We study Kant, we study Marx, but we don't study white supremacy, and it is the overarching political system that we are under. Now this slide, there. When we think of indoctrination, rarely does anyone, did y'all notice the two different slides? Y'all caught that? I did that. So, when we think of indoctrination, rarely does anyone think of the ideology of white supremacy. And you might be thinking, why would I? The ideology of white supremacy is very broad and it encompasses various belief systems. Of course, you've got your garden variety, whites only society, that's where they want to live. You've got your white people are genetically superior to other people group. Those are the ones that people typically think of when they think of white supremacy. We think of neo-Nazis, skinheads, burning crosses, people who want whites only societies, people who believe that they're genetically superior. But then there are those who believe or are apathetic to the ideology that whites should have dominance where they coexist with people of other backgrounds. And then you have white people who have their own culture that they feel is superior to the cultures of others. What we're taught to believe is that people who hold the ideology of white supremacy are a small number and are typically from the families of like Klan members and neo-Nazis. And when we hear the term white supremacy, we do, as I said, think of neo-Nazis, swastikas, Klans, khakis, tiki torches. Yeah, see, you gotta think of that now, don't you? Yeah, we all do. These people are all certainly white supremacists, but they are today's outward display of the ideology in its most honest form. The ideology of white supremacy is far more insidious than this. I'm sorry, I don't know my own slides. It has reinvented itself in the last 50 years after certain terms, behaviors, and outward racial violence fell out of favor. That way, those willing to express their racism would take on the term white supremacy, while the overarching ideology was able to hide and get taught as American history. Children today are taught that white people should have dominance where they coexist with other people, and that society is superior to other cultures. Understanding the ideology of white supremacy and the histories of non-whites is crucial to understanding this nation now, yet many high schools continue to present students with a whitewashed version of that history that deifies white men in power and excludes black and brown people and women as if their histories are irrelevant and do not contribute to the shaping of the nation. Shouldn't American history begin here? There was a guy in the comments section where I found this map, and he was from Washington State, and he said that in his American history class, his freshman year, they teach them Native American history the first semester of the year. The second semester is called white settlement. But they do actually, teach. I mean, look at how many, there's a history there that we just gloss right over. They get a chapter or a paragraph, typically. But imagine if all American children were taught in depth about Native civilizations and about Black history. They'd certainly be better equipped to understand the present. They'd know the contributions that we've all made to American culture as well. And not just through a chapter, because we're not just talking about people, we're talking about a people. So back in 2014, it's a crazy story, The New Jersey-based College Board wrote a revised framework for the advanced placement history course that Jefferson County, Colorado, not Kentucky, Jefferson County, Colorado seniors would take for college credit. The new curriculum would de-emphasize memorization of facts and would instead develop historical thinking and critical analysis. It would include an honest account of history, which would include the devastating effects white supremacy has had. The majority conservative school board was outraged, very outraged, and the Republican National Committee held a formal congressional investigation. They then wrote and passed a resolution criticizing the new course as a radically revisionist view of American history that emphasizes negative aspects of our nation's history while omitting or minimizing positive aspects. For them, it was okay to maximize their impact, minimize everybody else's. Then they threatened to withhold federal funding to the College Board, which gets millions of dollars from a number of states. And the Texas State Board said that to have a history that would include everybody else was un-American. Yeah, and it was political bias. The new curriculum was certainly different because it attempted to remove the whitewashing. Now, over the past few decades, curriculums have attempted to shift the narrative by being more accurate to the perspectives of more than white America. Yet Christian conservatives fight this. They believe teaching history with a critical analysis of the information provided is, as I said, anti-American, anti-patriotic, anti-white, and that it's political. But back in Colorado, the school board, in Jefferson County, Colorado, the school board formed a curriculum review committee that would require students to learn a sanitized version of history that encouraged patriotism and discouraged protest. The Colorado school board member, her name was, I'm trying to remember her name, I think it was Julie Williams. She wrote what they would use as the guidelines to determine the AP course, which would be that materials should promote citizenship, patriotism, essentials and benefits of the free enterprise system, respect for authority, and respect for individual rights. Materials should not encourage or condone civil disorder, social strife, or disregard of the law. Instructional materials should present positive aspects of the United States and its heritage. When American history is only taught from the perspective of white supremacy and the perspective and histories of those that it subjugated or only granted a brief nod or a chapter, the ideology is upheld. I can't tell you the number of times I've come across someone online saying, "We invented everything. If it wasn't for us, you wouldn't have insert technological advancement," and but we did. You know, you probably can't even read that. Maybe the top part you can. This guy was upset that when he did a Google search for American inventors, black people showed up. That freaked him out. It really did. It freaked him out. But I can understand his confusion. If you are taught American history in the way that we teach it, why would black folks show up? That many. Maybe George Washington Carver and some peanuts, but you wouldn't really get anybody else or the other inventions of George Washington Carver. He had several. But we don't really teach anything. But I find the comments quite telling. I wish you could read them. You probably can't. I should not have put that slide in here. But yeah, we don't like that it's done to us either. You know, they don't like that you don't get a bunch of white Americans showing up because they feel like they're being excluded. Well, welcome to the club. You know. But it's ridiculous to believe that we didn't invent anything. It's amazing to me when we were doing all that damn labor. You had to come up with easier ways to do stuff, so it's kind of interesting to me. But the omission of black contributions in American history leads people like this poster and the subsequent commenters here to confusion and anger that white inventors aren't given first rights because the contributions of black people are irrelevant and insignificant. During the 2016 Republican National Convention, asshole, y'all know him, claimed that non-white people had no contributions to civilization. He said, I would ask you to go back through history and figure out where are these contributions that have been made by these other categories of people you are talking about. Where did any other subgroup of people contribute more to civilization? He's obviously touting the ideology of white supremacy because that's what is taught in many of our classrooms. American history should be teaching the contributions, I've said this again, I'm going to keep on repeating that, the contributions of minorities, as well as the laws that were enacted to shut the doors on their progress. Not only is the ideology of white supremacy upheld in American classrooms, but white supremacist extremism feeds on the notions of white exceptionalism. I began reading and following Sam Harris about a decade ago. He's come under fire for quite a few things of late, but I'm not going to touch on anything other than his comments in regards to white supremacy, because I believe he is not alone in his views, and I believe that his views are dangerous. He was quoted as saying, white supremacy is a fringe belief that we don't have to worry about too much right now. He goes on to say that it is an ideology and not a religion, and it is not attracting psychologically normal people, and that it has no death cult of martyrdom forming, and is therefore less threatening than Islam's jihadists. But from 2009 to 2018, far right-wing violent extremist groups accounted for 73% of terrorist killings compared to 23% carried out by Islamic extremists, according to the United States Government Accountability Office. Now, Islamic terrorism is a threat. 23% is bad. I'm not saying it's not. I'm just saying that white supremacist extremism is too. And statistically speaking, it is the #1 threat. But that did not stop the FBI from dubbing black identity extremism. Ever heard of it? It's not a thing. It's not a thing, but it is the #1 threat named in 2018 due to the riots in Ferguson in 2014. Yeah. Oh, along with, hang on, this is great. Along with animal rights extremists, environmentalists, and anti-authority extremists. They're all above white supremacists. They are labeled a medium-level threat and on the decline as they rise. Yeah. They were actually asked to stop using that term, black identity extremists, by Democrats in 2017 because it's racist. They agreed to, but in lockstep with the current administration, they lied. So they still put it in just the way they had before. And they actually came up with a program, this is so off my talk, but they actually came up with a program called Iron Fist to crack down on them. They hadn't committed a crime. So, and every instance of a supremacist, an extremist act that they alluded to in that document, this was a leaked document, by the way, it's by the Young Turks. Check them out, I love them. But yeah, it's a really, you should watch this video, it's really good. But every instance of extremism that they cited in naming black identity extremism was a white supremacist act. But they still labeled it on them. So when you have an opportunity, Google FBI and black identity extremism. It's institutional racism right in your face. But back to Sam Harris. He's being called a racist for his comments, among other things. But in this case, it's because of the varying degrees that he had in his response to Islamic terrorism and his watering down of white supremacy in the wake of white extremist terror attacks. His responses to 9/11 and Islamic terrorism were swift and hard. He wrote books and made appearances. But when white supremacist extremists were murdering and actually do resort to death by martyrdom via cop, leaving manifestos and social media trails, often depicting their beliefs, Sam splits hairs on it being an ideology and not a religion, and dubs white supremacy a fringe, and those willing to carry out terror attacks as a fringe of that fringe. But it isn't just the fringe Islamic jihadist that he calls out in his book, End of Faith, and in Islam, the Future of Tolerance. He also calls out the moderate Muslim, because to adhere to any of the teachings, even if you're not adhering to the fundamentalist teachings, was to be a part of the problem. For him and for Donald Trump, you cannot repudiate enough the inherently inhumane, unfair aspects of a belief that causes the fringe to act. Muslims were called to denounce every terror attack that happened under the guise of Islam and were subjected to profiling across the country and threatened banning from American soil. Because of the overarching ideology of white supremacy, this call is only made on black people and brown people. President Obama was accused of being a Muslim for 8 years because to be brown or black and a Muslim is to have your citizenship and allegiance to America in question. Donald Trump also said that a Mexican judge could not be fair to him because he was Mexican. The ideology of white supremacy teaches that white people can and will be just and fair, even while the history shows overwhelmingly otherwise. Authority in the hands of the wealthy white elite was de facto just for all, and black and brown people will automatically be unjust and mean to white people. Also, it's worth mentioning that even while Sam said that white supremacy isn't attracting psychologically normal people, he had a wonderful interview on his Waking Up podcast with a guy named Christian Picciolini, who respectfully disagrees. Christian is the co-founder of a nonprofit peace advocacy organization called Life After Hate. He's dedicated himself to helping others counter racism and extremism because he was once a violent part of and later the leader of the white supremacist skinhead movement here in America in the 80s and 90s. He goes on, he actually goes in and seeks to deconvert members in the movement, and he's had great success. He was a psychologically normal teen when he got in. He was bored, his parents were busy, he was looking for a group to hang out with, and he got sucked in. And given the climate of this nation and what's taught, that's not hard. So much has to be taken up and considered to address the ideology of white supremacy that maintains inequalities in our education, wealth, and justice system, an ideology that feeds the white supremacist extremism that we see on the rise. There are ways to push back and advocate for true American history that is inclusive of the histories of Black Americans, Natives, women, and other people of color right alongside that of white men that have been in power. And we do this by advocating for true American history to be taught in our schools. When parents and students in Jefferson County, Colorado heard about the conservative school board's attempts to block the College Board's new curriculum that would emphasize the histories of other Americans, including the white men that were in power throughout America's history, nearly 1,000 students and their parents and teachers from 6 high schools walked out in protest of the school board's decision. So what can we do? We can support the efforts of programs like the Zen Education Project. It is coordinated by rethinkingschools.org and teachingforchange.org. The project promotes and supports the teaching of all people's history in classrooms across the country. Teachers or anyone can sign up to receive access to free downloadable information, lessons, and articles organized by theme, time, and grade period. And I also have these bookmarks that they sent me for you guys to check them out. They're at my table. So, and it has the little themes. Why are you laughing? Yeah, I'm serious. Check them out. And this is Howard Zen's book from the Zen Project. The teaching materials that are on the website are based on the approach to history in this book, and it emphasizes the role of people of color, working class poor white people, and the organized social movements taking up in shaping history. The site also lists recommended books, films, websites. It has workshops. But we should look at the people and not just the owners. We should look at the soldiers and not just the commanders. We should learn about the invaded as well as the invaders, the enslaved as well as the slaveholder, to begin to see the United States more accurately. For over a decade, the Zen Education Project has introduced students to a more accurate, complex, and engaging understanding of history than is traditionally taught in our textbooks. That's their websites for you. So please take some time to visit their websites and consider donating to their efforts as well. Have your teacher friends to check them out. Let your school board and elected officials know how important it is to teach all of American history, and send them over to these websites. It's just a phone call or an email. Insist that they incorporate true American history in our public schools. And let's support the efforts to stop teaching our children lies, half-truths, and one-sided history that contributes to the maintenance of white supremacy. To combat where we are headed, we have to acknowledge it. We have to acknowledge white supremacy, and we have to acknowledge that the omissions that have been made matter. The ideology of white supremacy is inaccurate, it is insidious, it occupies the Oval Office, it is in the Senate and it is in the House, it's in the state and it's in our local governments, it's in our schools, and it's on our police forces. White supremacy emboldens the worst among us to act, leaving the rest of us in shock, proclaiming that this is not the America we know. It is not the America we grew up in. But it is the America you grew up in. And rather than preserving the myth of those in power, a myth that masks the truth and history of all other people besides white men, let's advocate for the teaching of true American history. This is a history that includes those that have been here the whole time, influencing the decisions and actions of those in power. Black people, Native Americans, and women. It's time we teach true American history. Thank you.